Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of the One Hood Power Hour. I am your co-host Kahari Mosley here with my illustrious co-host Miracle Jones. We have another incredible episode tonight. We're going to be talking with a powerhouse panel of statewide political experts talking about all things 2022 with the big statewide elections, as well as other things that have gone on in the political world, near and far. A lot to talk about. Welcome, Miracle. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing good. It's a hectic, Monday evening after such eventful events in the city, from the sports games to even the legislature this morning. A lot of stuff has been moving and happening right here in Pennsylvania. So we're very excited for our great panel and to talk to you all about like the elections and what's going on, not only here locally, but also at the national level.
Absolutely. And just some of the things that have happened since we've last been together. State Representative Austin Davis has thrown his hat in the ring officially for Lieutenant Governor with a big endorsement from gubernatorial frontrunner Attorney General Josh Shapiro. They had an event down in McKeesport. For those who are not familiar with Pennsylvania geography, that's a town about, I guess, 25 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, where State Representative Austin Davis hails from. And it looks to be, a very formidable ticket. We'll see what the other candidates have to say, particularly on the lieutenant governor side. Well, I'm sure we'll see more official announcements as we get closer to the petition circulation date in February. And also another thing I wanted to mention and get your feedback on. There's been a kind of a big local story about the city of Pittsburgh showing its interest in hosting the 2024 Republican National Convention. Miracle, is that something you've been following over the last days as well as the local coverage?
Yes. So a lot of people woke up to a tweet from Chris Potter, who's been a guest of the show before, talking about Visit Pittsburgh has requested the RNC convention for the 2024 year to come to Pittsburgh. It's also, per Ganey's statement earlier, there may be a request to recruit also the DNC convention to come to Pittsburgh on the basis that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a deficit within the city, and people are trying to find ways to make up for that deficit without, of course, increasing taxes. Of course, this created a backlash. A lot of people on city and county council were not happy to learn about this, especially because the city itself was advocating for the convention to occur. A lot of people rightly were talking about, what does this mean? We've had instances where there have been armed protesters who have been of a conservative background going through downtown. What does it also mean that we're one of the cities that have been listed as a hotbed of white supremacy? And on top of that, as we're still in this global pandemic, what does it mean to recruit people to come into the city who may or may not be vaccinated, and for recruiting thousands of people when our medical facilities are kind of out their max and we don't have a really way out right now in this pandemic? Should we be recruiting these type of conventions to come to Pittsburgh? So it is a lot up for debate, but the city and county are working to recruit businesses and conventions to come to Pittsburgh, of course, to make up for the financial deficit. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so it's really been interesting, the back and forth. I'm sure we'll hear more about this as this potential bid unfolds. I know Milwaukee, Salt Lake City, and some other cities have been announced as well as kind of finalists, for this convention. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out. What are some other things happening in the political world that we should know about, Miracle?
Yes. So we know that there is going to be a not necessarily a runoff election here, but a special election here in Pittsburgh. Both uh, current Mayor Ed Gainey and currently Representative Jake Wheatley, their seats are going to be up as they have taken on new positions within the city government. Now, we'll talk a little bit about this later with our guests. And even though the election maps may not be drawn out by the time this April primary comes through, we are going to have our special runoff election in April, and then we'll have our general primary in May. So it's going to be a very busy election season for Southwestern Pennsylvania. On top of that, we know that the Biden administration has been talking about fighting for voter rights, and a group of organizations led by the New Georgia Project and Black Voters Matter have actually been taking a stand. They're going to boycott the Biden speech tomorrow based on the lack of urgency. They've said the Biden campaign administration has shown up for voting rights. In addition, we're a week out from MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and even his family have said no celebration without legislation. So you're going to see a lot of civil rights and voter rights organizations these next few days really be pushing and pressing the Biden administration to pass a lot of the Voting Rights Act, from the John Lewis Act to the Pro-Democracy Act, to make sure that a lot of the redistricting efforts are fair and balanced, to make sure that people have access to polling places, to stop the mass closure of polling places, and to stop the reduction of polling hours. So you're going to see a lot of that work in the next few days.
Yeah, and as you said, the administration had been, really touting this speech in Atlanta, as kind of the reset, as Build Back Better goes to the back burner in many ways. This is supposed to be the focus of the administration's federal policy priorities and initiatives. So it's going to be very interesting to see the reception that the president gets in Atlanta, as well as the content and the reception of the speech, as well as the whatever dynamics are created by this boycott by groups that have been very integral into the transformation that has taken place in Georgia. We had Nsé who fought on the show right after Georgia was called in 2020. So I think we're gonna have to reach out to her and get a bird's eye view of how everything is going to go down in Georgia this week. So now turning from Georgia to the state of Pennsylvania, Miracle, tell us about the incredible guests we have on the show tonight, and what we'll be talking about.
So there's so much going on within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We wanted to make sure that we brought you people who are embedded in the states of what is Pennsylvania politics. Some from the New Pennsylvania Project. We have Khadija Kenner. From Commonwealth Communications, we have JJ Abbott. And we have two election reporters from Y, Katie Meyer, and from the Penn Capital Star, Stephen Caruso is going to talk a lot about the changes that have been going on. Now it's like every single day is a new piece of legislation or a new amendment being moved to change and alter the way we have access to voting. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start off with JJ and Khadija, who's going to talk a little about the landscape, and then we're going to be joined by Katie and Stephen, who are going to talk about some of the happenings that have gone over the past few days. So we'll welcome Khadija and JJ Abbott to the program.
Good evening. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Miracle. Happy New Year, Kahari.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Welcome.
Happy New Year. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I hope everybody got rest. For those who didn't go to sleep early, like myself, I saved myself the stress of the Chargers Raiders last minute field goal. So I hope everybody's rested up and feels good and ready. You know, for a great week of NFL football, and also tonight. I keep forgetting it's the big Georgia Alabama game for those into you know college football as well. So just to begin, let's kind of just start with a 30,000-foot question. We'll go with Kadita first, then JJ. Just what should Pennsylvanians know about this upcoming election? If you had the opportunity to just give an elevator pitch, from the 12th floor down to the lobby, and you're talking to Joe Voter, starting with Kadita, what are the most important things that Pennsylvanians should know about this upcoming election, and why should they be tuned in?
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that January 6th was the 1-year anniversary of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And so we need to make sure that everyone realizes how important our votes are, particularly communities of color who came out in record numbers. And it is because communities of color came out in record numbers, and with the assist of Act 77, right, giving us the opportunity to access our ballot and vote at home, vote early. These are the items that ensure that we were able to cast our ballots in record numbers. And so it's very important that we recognize that. And so what we need to know for 2022 is that we need to come out in the same types of numbers as we did in 2020. Consider this a presidential election, because the consequences of this election are just as dire as a presidential election. 2022, we're going to vote for half of all of our Pennsylvania Senate members. We're going to vote for every single member of the Pennsylvania House. We're going to vote for a new governor who has been the firewall protecting us against bad actors currently in Harrisburg. We're going to vote to replace Senator Pat Toomey. Shout out to the Tuesdays with Toomey folks who are listening in. Tuesdays with Toomey out there in Pittsburgh, who are out there on Grant Street every Tuesday in the snow, rain, and sun. Shout out to all those folks. And because we have a very important election in 2022, and we throw around these words like defend democracy and, this is the most important election of our lifetime, the most crucial. Oh my goodness. It's the truth. It is the truth. 2022 should be treated as if it is a presidential election, and we must come out in numbers, not only for the general election, but for this May 17th primary.
Absolutely, and totally agree with Kadita on all that she said, particularly the sort of stakes for our democracy at large. But I think, I'd be remiss as someone who spent a lot of time working for 5 years in the governor's office. I have a pretty upfront view of how big of the stakes are for the 2022 election for Pennsylvania. And I think, a lot of times, we sort of get lost in the noise. Miracle and Kahari were talking about all the things that are happening. But when you really take that big picture of what is at stake, particularly in the gubernatorial election, but also, in our legislative elections, the direction of Pennsylvania is at a precipice in this election. And, it's not just the things that we could do. There's a lot of them. If we were to elect people who fought for everyday Pennsylvanians, we could do a lot of great things. But unfortunately, because of our political environment, because of the way that Pennsylvania is, we're also in a position where we have to be on defense, and we are defending quite possibly, a huge shift from where Pennsylvania has been for a long time in our politics. And if there were to be a Republican governor, it would put so much, at risk that we haven't even really considered in maybe a decade or even longer. Things like taking away workers' rights to organize in their workplace, taking away a woman's right to access health care in the way they do, taking away additional rights that have been awarded, not just rights, but also programs that have been established under Governor Wolf to help people in the LGBTQ community. And it's not just the legislation that could go into effect, but it's also all the things that they could do to the inner workings of government, from our elections to social services that are essential for people, everything from Medicaid to nutrition assistance to funding for our schools. So all of these things become If we don't have someone in the governor's office like Governor Wolf, who believes in people's right to organize, who believes in the right to vote, and who believes that government should actually solve people's problems, that we could really face some really significant changes. And that doesn't even talk about the U.S. Senate, where Pennsylvania could decide whether or not we retain a majority in the U.S. Senate that makes anything possible. I mean, we're so frustrated by all the things that aren't possible right now. If we lose that majority, we could lose another Supreme Court justice. We could the opportunity to appoint a Supreme Court justice. We lose all of the progress that's being made right now on the federal bench, and any chance of any sort of legislation becoming possible. So, the stakes are really high, but I think to Keitha's point, that's why everybody's got to lean in. When the stakes are high and the moment is fraught with a lot of things that could go wrong, that's when we got to organize. That's why we got to get involved, and that's why we got to look to our leaders for action to show people that coming out to vote is actually worth something, and that we need them to do that again, like they did in 2018, like they did in 2014 in Pennsylvania, to deliver the kind of government that we want, particularly in the governor's office.
Thank you for that. And going back to you, Khadija, you talked a little bit earlier about, Act 77 making it so that people are able to vote. We know federally there is this demand for all of this, legislation to come down. What are some of the barriers that people are facing when it comes to the right to vote? And why is it so important that the federal elected officials get their act together?
I don't know if it's been any more consequential than in this moment that the federal government get its act together and do what it is that they need to do to ensure that the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act is passed by the federal government. We are at the moment here in Pennsylvania where we need the federal government to defend us against the bad actors currently in Harrisburg. I mean, if I could run down all these House bills, it is a laundry list of House bills that the current state legislature, GOP-led legislature, are trying to pass to suppress our votes, to disenfranchise voters. Here we are in the time of a global pandemic. We have the resurgence of COVID, and yet we can't get the state legislature to actually pass legislation to help people. We are on the defense because these bills that they're trying to ram through the General Assembly are not here to help voters. We talk about what we don't want. Well, here's what we do want. Here's what federal legislation would give us. We want early voting. We want that to be mandatory. The Freedom to Vote Act calls for 15 days for every state, a uniform here, where every state is allowing for 15 days of early voting. We need that to ensure that those who are working 2 and 3 shift jobs can get out and cast their ballot. Mail-in ballot, mail-in voting, very popular, particularly in these times of COVID, for those who don't feel safe and secure about getting out and voting at their polling locations, or don't want to wait in 2, 3, 4-hour lines, particularly that are in communities of color, because that's typically where these long lines are. We need to make sure that we have early voting, that we can do same-day voter registration like they do in North Carolina, that we can do automatic voter registration. There's so many things that we can do to help the electorate get to the polls versus the things that are going to stop them from accessing the ballot, like having to get a photocopy of their driver's license if they want to get a vote by mail ballot. I don't have a photocopier in my house. How do I get access to that if I have so many other things to do? These are all barriers put before folks that already have enough barriers in front of them anyway. And so if we're going to make voting easier for folks, we need to make sure that we are removing the barriers that are in front of those who are having a hard time accessing the ballot. My great-grandmother used to say, if you're not going to help me, at least don't hurt me. And none of these bills that are coming out of the PA-led, GOP-led legislature are helpful. All of this is under, this guise that we did not have a free and fair election in 2020. And we all know we did. It was proven accurate, not only by the state courts, but by our federal courts here. And this is just the erosion of the public's confidence in our elections and in our systems. And we're not going to tolerate it. And we're going to make sure that we get our folks out to the polls in 2022 in record numbers to cast our ballots, because that is how we grow some power in our communities. We must mobilize so we can grow some power in our communities. And shout outs to those of you in Pittsburgh who did what y'all needed to do in 2021 and the way you mobilized and turned out the vote. Success to all of you out there in Pittsburgh. We need to bring that same energy statewide.
And JJ, you're talking about, like the threats to democracy and everything that is happening. What are some of the issues that you're seeing? Could you mention a lot of these House bills, but what are some of the issues that you're seeing that's like becoming a barrier to these statewide elections? And what are some races that you think people need to focus on that's going to improve the way voting elections occur in Pennsylvania?
Well, there's a lot, and so I just want to give a shout out to One Power and all the folks that organized in the 2021 election, because we actually were able to have some significant victories there. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that every level of the ballot, there's a litmus test for the Republican Party, and that is, will you disrupt and will you try to discredit and will you do everything in your power to undermine our elections? And what we've seen in Harrisburg has shifted the conversation completely. I mean, we're no longer having even a conversation about election reform. I mean, the bare minimum isn't even on the table. Things like pre-canvassing and whether we can count, whether counties could just simply count ballots before start processing ballots ahead of election day. That is being held hostage. So we shifted from election reform to really election sabotage. And we're seeing this across the country, right? We're seeing Republicans try to infiltrate their county boards of elections so that they can have power over whose ballots get struck down. So since there's this litmus test at every level of the ballot, it makes every election important to our democracy. And what we saw in 2021 is folks were able to organize in different ways around their elections. We actually saw significant victories for pro-democracy elected officials in some of our largest counties, in places like Lehigh County, and Northampton County, where the Republican candidate for county executive who would have controlled elections there literally attended the January 6th insurrection. And in Delaware County, where they have some of the most accessible elections in the Commonwealth, where they have over almost 40 drop boxes that are available to make it convenient for voters to return their ballot. All of that could have been taken away if people and organizations like One Power and people across the state that are organizing in local communities weren't doing that work. In Pittsburgh, electing progressive candidates to county courts is really important for our elections, because that's where the first line of defense is going to be for our democracy, is in those county courts. And so now, as we go to 2022, there's three elections that are just essential. And it's really, what we have going, which is one, the governor's office, right? It's not just whether he will sign or veto voter suppression laws. It's also how the Department of State will go about their business. Will they be like the court administration, where they do everything in their power to make it harder for counties to make it easy for people to vote? Or will they do what Governor Wolf has committed to, which is to implement things like online voter registration, which in 2014, Pennsylvania did not have, although it could have had, only because the governor's office didn't make it a priority. So the governor's office is essential, not just for whether laws are put into effect to make it harder to vote, but whether our systems are in place to count our votes, to make it easier for people to register to vote, for make it easier for all people, everyone in Pennsylvania to participate. And then we have our legislative elections, which we're seeing right now play out in real time. And it's not just what bills they would pass. Now we have to think about what constitutional amendments are they going to try to put on sleepy election ballots so that they can try to get 22% of the people to decide whether or not there are these consequential changes. And now they're coming after our elections with the same things that they did like in the primary of 2021. And then last is our federal elections, right? And that is, we have the opportunity at a federal level to put in place some guide rails and put some checks and balances in place against people who are trying, particularly in the Republican Party, that are trying to manipulate our elections for their own gain. And it is essential that is delivered, not just because they promised it, but also because it's the most important thing. And I think, Khadija is someone that preaches to the choir all the time. Democracy is where everything starts, right? You don't get anything else if you don't have a healthy democracy. And we've seen that in Pennsylvania, where we have gerrymandering, where we've had terrible voting laws that are restricted for a long time. We've seen it. Our legislature doesn't deliver on the problems that people are facing because there's no accountability for them in our elections because they think they've already won the game. And so now we have this opportunity to go out and organize and get people activated, and the stakes couldn't be higher. And I'm just so glad that there are people like Khadija and One Hood Power and organizations all across the state that are doing that, not just for the big elections, but for every single election, whether it's a primary or a general, whether it's an off year or a federal year or a presidential year. We need to be doing it all the time. And with the stakes this high, I think everybody's just got to lean in, and we got to steel our spines, and we got to fight back against these things so that we can actually maybe get some things done and not just constantly be on the defense about how they're going to make Pennsylvania worse.
Yeah, a quick question before we bring in Stephen and Katie. We'll start with JJ and then go to Khadija. This is a question about, redistricting. And, we know this is a redistricting year. And we know one of the big challenges that we have had in the state is that in many cases, the composition of our Congress, the composition of our state house, the composition of our state Senate doesn't truly reflect the voter registration rolls and the demographic diversity of the state. Starting with JJ, can you talk a little bit about, one, where is the process now, with the maps? And what from a 30,000 foot view, what do the current maps reflect now that may have not been reflected in maps in previous redistricting processes?
Sure. So in terms of the process for the legislative districts, the commission has published its plan. The commission's made up of a neutral chair who's a former University of Pittsburgh chancellor, highly regarded statewide as one of our preeminent public servants of a generation, is in charge of that. And then there's two leaders from each chamber, one from each caucus, so a Democrat and a Republican. The commission has approved preliminary maps that are now subject to a 30-day comment period. And then after that, which wraps up just in just about a week, the commission has 30 days to finalize those maps and submit them to the Supreme Court as outlined in the Constitution. What we're seeing right now is, for the first time in decades, Pennsylvania has had an actual fair process. And Chairman Nordenberg has brought to that process the position of a fair arbiter, and also someone that wants to transform the way that this process is done. The maps that we have right now are so bad, it's really hard to describe them. They were drawn specifically, like the congressional map, to benefit one political party and an entire set of incumbents on both sides of the aisle. The House map that was proposed by the LRC is transformational, particularly in regard to the way that it is drawn, in terms of it really, all of the constitutional and legal things that legislative maps are supposed to do, it does. And then when you look at the actual, like in terms of proportionality, like how many, Pennsylvania is pretty much a 50-50 state. It moves us a lot closer to a competitive map in the sense of each party has somewhat of a shot to get to majority. And then on the last point, Kari, in terms of how you led this question off, it brings incredible opportunity to the communities that are actually growing in Pennsylvania. Communities of color, Black, Latino, Hispanic, Asian and Pacific Islander communities, urban and suburban communities that have seen tremendous growth in population. It actually not only resets, but corrects an imbalance that has existed, where shrinking rural areas, because they were controlled by the Republican Party, got outsized influence in the legislature, and this map has a chance to fix it. And so it's no surprise that the people that rigged the current maps to be in their favor are now having a complete meltdown about the fact that there could be fairer elections in the future. And so we're seeing this play out right now. So the most important thing, I think, right now is that people do feel that if people want fair maps and they want this process to conclude in the way that it's been operated, which is getting better representation for the communities all across Pennsylvania, then they need to speak up. The public comment period is open right now. You can submit a comment online and make your voice heard. And it's really important that we're doing that right now in this moment when the LRC is facing a lot of pressure to do things the way they used to be done, which doesn't benefit anyone but the people in power right now.
And to piggyback on what JJ was discussing as it relates to, attending these hearings, being a voice. I went to the meetings, the hearings on Friday. I sat in the room in the North Office, hearing room 1 for an hour, just listening to the testimony from state representatives, from everyday citizens on how the redistricting, the reapportionment will impact their lives and in their communities. And as JJ mentioned, we talk about the change in demographics here in the Commonwealth, where we're up to almost 27% of all residents here in the Commonwealth are people of color. We've had a 540,000 people increase in communities of color, where the white demographic has decreased. I'm sorry, the white demographic population has decreased by more than 540,000 people, where the demographics of communities of color have increased by 800,000 people. And so if we want a map that is more representative of Pennsylvania, and we want folks to be able to ensure that their communities are represented and they actually get to have a candidate of their choosing versus candidates actually choosing us, then we need to make sure that we're getting involved in the process. Democracy just doesn't happen. Just casting our ballots is great. We have to take it a step beyond, because we are in peril in this moment. We talk about these different bills that are running through Harrisburg in this very moment. I have to write them down because there's so many, and all of them relating to gerrymandering. And it is no secret that when the PA-led or GOP-led legislature is not happy with the results of elections, they're going to do everything in their power to maintain that power, grab power, usurp authority and power from others. We think about House Bill 38, the judicial gerrymandering bill, who possibly could have more legs this week. It could go through the House on second consideration. We think about House Bill 2207, which is a sham commission. Really, the whole purpose of that is to take power away from the Democratic-leaning Supreme Court and give it to the Republican-leaning Commonwealth Court, and then give it to the legislators to ultimately make their own maps again. We think about House Bill 1880, which would limit terms of judges, and especially those who are currently in place. And so those who are currently sitting on the Supreme Court, that democratically led Supreme Court, would not be able to run for election again for another term. We think about House Bill 2141, which would then change the way in which we elect judges. And, instead of it being retention voting after 10 years of service, they have to run for re-election again, which puts more money into politics, which politicizes our courts. So all of these things don't just happen. They happen because we have a legislature who's upset about who came out and cast a ballot in 2020 and 2021, and they don't know how to stop it. And so how they figured out they can stop this is by putting all of these things into constitutional amendments and changing our Pennsylvania Constitution, because they can't move any meaningful legislation through the General Assembly the right way. And so they pass the buck to voters, hoping to get this on a ballot when it's, quote unquote, an off-year election or a primary election when 20% of the electorate shows up. This is what they're trying to do. And it's no secret. And we saw this earlier in 2018 when they tried to impeach Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices because of the fair maps that were created in that time to do away with the partisan gerrymandering. So all of this, we just have to take all this into consideration. It's more than just casting our ballot in May and November. We have to make some noise. And I think about, you mentioned this, Miracle. We have LaTosha Brown and others, Usay Ufat, in Georgia, who are saying that we cannot out-organize this. You cannot out-organize voter suppression. There's only but so much that these groups, these grassroots organizations and others can do on the ground. We need help. We need the federal government to get it together and protect us, because if the current legislature here in Pennsylvania can't move legislation, they're going to pass the buck off to voters and constitutional amendments. And we have a very poor track record here in Pennsylvania at saying no to things when they reach a ballot. We can't allow that to happen. And so we know that Pennsylvania's GOP-led legislature, they have no interest in making access to the ballot more fair and accessible, particularly because too many folks of color actually are getting the opportunity to come out and cast ballots. And so we have to fight back here. We have to take this old school, and we just need to make sure that we're communicating this within our communities and make sure that everybody knows how important the 2022 election is. This is a presidential election. Let's make no qualms about this. We have to get out and cast our ballots in record numbers and make our voices heard while we still can.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're going to be bringing in Katie Meyer and Stephen Caruso to join the panel. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. Stephen Caruso from the PA Capital Star and Katie Meyer from WHYY. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Miracle, do you have the first question?
Yes, so we're talking a lot about the changes to voting, and I know Stephen, you had a not to trigger you anymore, but you got up early this morning and you started tweeting about the special hearing that happened today. Can you just talk a little bit about what those amendments were for the legislature, and what does that mean for some of the voting election changes that are happening?
Yeah, so bright and early, 8 a.m., the Pennsylvania House had a meeting. This is the first meeting of a long process for everything I'm about to mention. So, that balancing act of good thing to keep an eye on. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is now in the works for a reason. The main thing would probably be the redistricting amendments. Redistricting is when they redraw the lines every year after every 10 years after the census. As JJ was kind of describing, the process hasn't been as good for Republicans, and advocates have asked them to make a new process that takes politicians out, because right now it's done in a process that is still connected to the legislature. There's still 4 of the 5 people drawing the maps are elected officials, and advocates have been saying, hey, the elected officials who run in these districts shouldn't be drawing these districts. That just can be a conflict of interest. And for a very long time, for years, Republicans in the General Assembly have refused to move anything that would change that process, at least especially in the House. And then finally, the process has gone against them. They're really not happy with how these maps are coming out. Tons of stories going to be written about whether this is a Democratic gerrymander or just undoing years of gerrymandering for Republicans. I'm not going to offer an opinion on that right now, but just the point is finally Republicans feel under the gun from the redistricting process, and they decide to change it in a way that there's a lot of details of it, but the main thing that I think what people need to know is that they want a process where they will still have a final say on the maps, and they actually make it more explicit that the legislators who run in these districts that need to be drawn get a final say on how those districts look. And the process, and it's also the commission I've never seen one exactly like it. And, the advocates are worried it's basically set up to fail, which then would throw it to those lawmakers to draw themselves once again. So, this thing couldn't become law until 2023 at absolute earliest. But I think it is clear, this finally gets action after Republicans aren't happy with the process so far. And that to me was pretty noteworthy as someone who remembers covering 2018 when old moms from suburban Philadelphia were coming and banging on the door asking for them to make this process better, and nothing was done. And now 3 years later, Republicans feel under the gun from the process and are stepping forth to change it. There's some other changes in there too, which they've moved, such as making it so poll watchers could come from anywhere to watch polls. So someone from Elk County, Butler County could drive into Pittsburgh and watch polls there. This is something that Governor Tom Wolf has opposed. It has held up negotiations a bit. I think that would be one of the other main things I'd really highlight from today. That also advanced. That's not an amendment. That could go to Tom Wolf's desk, and I haven't asked him yet. I imagine that would be something he'd want to veto, but I also can't say. But that's held up negotiations before. But so those are kind of the 2 of the big things that happened this morning at 8 a.m. When I don't think I've had to go to an 8 a.m. since I was in college.
Yeah, a follow up for Katie. Wanted to switch gears a little bit to an issue that Kadita very thoughtfully brought up. January 6th. I know you've been covering some of the commemoration. You can talk a little bit about the event that was held in Philadelphia that you covered to kind of bring things full circle. Now we're talking about democracy and at this very important anniversary on a very solemn day. So just talk a little bit about and particularly in Philadelphia, obviously the birthplace of the American democracy. How was the anniversary handled?
Sure. So I think the big thing that people wanted to do when, the 1 year mark of the January 6th, 2021 insurrection happened was that, they don't want this thing to fade away. They don't want it to become par for the course and something that, is kind of moved past as a pretty significant event in American history. So that was the intention. These were events that were organized all around the country by a bunch of national groups, and Philadelphia, like a lot of events, work this way where, a national chapter will reach out to the Philadelphia chapter and say, hey, will you run this event? And they did. And again, it was a coordinated effort that you saw in tons and tons of cities around the country. In Philadelphia, you're right, they did mention that, it is the birthplace of American democracy. And one of the big things that was coming up was that Pennsylvania had a lot of people who were arrested in the wake of the insurrection. And so we actually were tied for the honor of second place there. It goes Florida and then Texas and Pennsylvania in terms of the numbers of people arrested. And again, this isn't a great measure of showing like how many people come from a given state to go to something like this, because federal officials are still filing charges, and also none of these cases have been adjudicated yet fully. There hasn't been a lot of sentencing that has happened. So, we are still waiting to get the full picture of what, can be legally proven about what happened. We know that lots more people did go and lots more people did do violent things and got held accountable for it. But one thing I do want to mention, just because it's in my neck of the woods and I've done some reporting on it, I mentioned Pennsylvania had a lot of people. One of the funny things that's come out in this data is that the people who ended up going to this event often were not from the most conservative parts of the state. Bucks County, which is right outside of Philadelphia, actually had the most of any county in Pennsylvania. And that's been a place where you've seen this reverberate through local politics in the years since the insurrection. I did some reporting on one specific school district in Bucks County, the Penridge School District. And that's one where, the board, now she's the president of the board. At the time, last year, she was the vice president, but she went to the insurrection. It's a woman named Joan Cullen. She openly has talked about it. And in that year, the politics in that school board have gotten really nasty and divided, much more so than I think a lot of parents would say they were beforehand. And this is a board that's had a district that's been divided for a long time. But just recently, the district, teachers in leadership, a curriculum manager for social studies put out an email saying, hey, don't discuss January 6th with your students. We don't want to bring it up. It's still being, filtered through the annals of history. And as historians, we can't fully assess what happened on that day. And there was a lot of outcry on that. And myself and my colleague, Emily Rizzo, reported on it. And I think it strikes a chord because people are really worried about how this is going to be remembered, this thing that happened, because there has been such a partisan divide in how people look at it. Republicans who I've talked to and who have said things publicly have been pretty eager to say, okay, it was a bad thing. Let's move on. It's not going to be something that's indicative of the state of our politics in the US. And Democrats have felt very, very opposite for the most part. And this isn't a fully partisan position, but it does tend to break down across those lines, that Democrats don't want to forget it, don't want to move on, and want to hold people accountable. So again, those are the broad strokes of the lines that we're seeing, but it really has affected even just the most local politics in pretty significant ways in the last year.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we're talking about impacting politics. We know that one of the gubernatorial candidates is also an individual who was at the insurrection on January 6th. So JJ, as you're looking at what's coming up for this next year, how are you wrestling with the messaging of talking about democracy and voting rights and protections when you have people who literally feel it's their duty to attack the Capitol in order to make sure that their person wins the election?
Well, it's quite a task. And Khadija and I have been involved in a lot of this work since 2020, along with a lot of other folks. And, I think there's two things I want to say. The first is I think we should ground ourselves in the fact that Republicans, the Republican Party, election reform, election integrity is the number one issue to their base. And so the reason why they're doing all these things is because they believe they can use the levers of power to preserve their own power. But it's also because politically, for their primary elections, this is the number one issue that their primary voters are concerned about. So we have to balance, as people who want to protect the right to vote, but also want to see our government take action on other things that are essential to help people, particularly right now when we're facing so many crises that impact so many people. And so we know that Republicans want nothing more than to only talk about our elections. They want to talk about the 2020 election, and they want to tell their base that they're doing everything possible to implement Trump's plan to make it harder to vote and preserve power for Trump. Because there's a great quote from Senator Gene Yaw, a Republican, who admitted in an interview that the reason why people in the base are communicating so often is because they think the election was stolen. It's because they believe the lies that Republicans told them. And it wasn't just Doug Mastriano who attended the insurrection. It was 140, I think over almost 100 elected Republicans who signed letters well before January 6th to tell Congress to reject our votes and overturn Pennsylvania's election. So while they want to talk about it, we also have to remember that they're all a part of it. It's not just Doug Mastriano. And honestly, I think there's a lot of Republicans that like to use Doug Mastriano as sort of like a fake, where they're like, oh, everybody get mad and pay attention to him. And he's a very dangerous person. But the things that they're trying to do are because of their leaders. And their leaders signed the letters. Their leaders organized the letters. Their leaders held press conferences to demand Trump's lies. And so I think that's really important that we remember. We do ground ourselves that like all of these Republicans are responsible. And they really want to talk about this because it's important to their primary voters. And the last thing that I would just say generally about how they're operating is I think we have to also remember that like this is how they operate, right? In Harrisburg is like when they don't get their way, they do everything they can. They attack the people that are actually trying to do the right things, and then they pursue a legislative agenda that represents their interests and how they could win. They, as Khadija mentioned, they did it in 2018. They were held accountable for gerrymandering the congressional maps. They immediately went to not to impeach Supreme Court justices, and then they established a judicial gerrymandering bill, which would overhaul judicial elections in their favor. In 2020, they lost. Donald Trump lost, and so now the only thing that Republicans care about is undoing our elections in their favor. And now they're doing it with redistricting. They didn't get their way with a fair chair, and now they are attacking him, despite the fact that he has way more credibility and trust in the public than they do. And they're trying to remake the redistricting process so that it cuts out any neutral arbiter and gives the power to them. So we see that this is a cycle every single time, and we just have to keep fighting back because it's not just that we have to protect and stop them from doing all these things they're doing. We also have a lot of people that are counting on us to actually get things done to help solve their problems. And so we have a lot of work to do and a lot of people to mobilize and organize. But that's why it's so important the work that groups like New Pennsylvania Project, One Hood Power, and groups all across the state are doing to get people engaged and make people feel like they have a stake in our elections.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, JJ. I wanted to just quick question for Katie and Stephen, and then we'll go to Khadija. It seems like everybody on the planet is running for a statewide office in Pennsylvania. So just kind of looking at the gubernatorial race and then, the Senate race, without going through the whole necessarily cast of characters, starting on the gubernatorial side and then to the Senate side, who are some of, if this was a reality show, in this cast of characters, who are some of the characters that seem to stand out, as we get ready for the season preview, of this Netflix saga? if you
Yeah.
will?
Yeah, good question. I guess I'll take the gubernatorial race. Maybe Stephen can do Senate, or vice versa, whatever you prefer. But I'll just start. We had a debate the other night for the gubernatorial candidates, and I would say the short list. And I'll give you my criteria, right? Because I don't want to be like unfair to anybody. But basically, the things that make a formidable candidate are: do you have some political experience or history, which means often you can form a reasonably successful campaign that's going to get you somewhere? You know how the petitioning process works, all that like technical stuff. And then also, are you going to be a good fundraiser? You need a lot of money to run in these races. So on the gubernatorial side, I'd say we're looking at Senate President Pro Tem Jake Corman. He is, the most powerful Republican in Pennsylvania right now. He's been in the Senate for a very, very long time. He won a seat that his father had previously held for a very long time. So, the J. Doyle Corman name is a long-standing name in Center County, which is where he's from. So he's in there. Doug Mastriano, the aforementioned Doug Mastriano just formally announced his candidacy. We've got Lou Barletta, the former congressman and unsuccessful 2018 Senate candidate. He lost to Bob Casey that year. We've got Bill McSwain. He's the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District, basically the Philly area of Pennsylvania. And those are like the big ones that are on my mind. Anybody else that comes up for you, Stephen?
Well, I guess I'd throw in Joe Gale, mostly because he's going to throw punches, and he'll be one of the more interesting people to watch just to see how hard he's going to go after his fellow Republicans, which I'm always going to find amusing.
Joe Gale, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a wide open race for the Republican side, and the only thing that makes it even funnier is how it is an absolutely not wide open race on the Democratic side of which is there is basically Josh Shapiro, and I think there's like two minor candidates who reached out to me, but when I say minor, it's basically Josh Shapiro.
Say just to sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but like we should note how like rare it is that this can happen in just modern Pennsylvania politics. Josh Shapiro is a person who is a savvy operator, has been known as such for a long time, and has a pretty long history in Pennsylvania politics. And when I say savvy operator, I mean one of the first things he became known for was brokering a power sharing agreement during a period of time in which the legislature had pretty close partisan control, and he wanted to keep Democrats having a lot of influence. So that it's kind of like background dealing. And so I can say, I mean, there has been a lot of just very careful positioning over the last many years of his political career in Pennsylvania that has taken Josh Shapiro into being the only viable Democratic, likely, who knows, things could happen, but the only likely Democratic candidate for this nomination in 2022. So it didn't come out of nowhere. This was a careful plan by Mr. Shapiro, who is currently the Attorney General, if we didn't say that.
And before we jump to the Senate candidate, I did want to mention that the very well-known Kellyanne Conway has joined Jake Corman's campaign. So Kellyanne Conway from Trump administration fame. So just to add to the drama in this Netflix saga that hopefully will be on Netflix one day. So Stephen, tell us a little bit about the very, very large group of candidates on both sides of the aisle running for U.S. Senate.
Yeah. So, on the Republican side, you have a reality TV star, Dr. Oz. He decided to come over from New Jersey and run in Pennsylvania. Then you have the former Wall Street finance executive, Daniel McCormick, who decided to come over from Connecticut and run in Pennsylvania. You might be sensing a trend. Then you do have one Pennsylvanian, Jeff Bartos, who's a Montgomery County real estate developer. And I think he's trying to be like, I'm the regular Republican guy who isn't trying to be too Trumpy, too anything. I'm just a Republican, like, your granddaddy's Republican.
From Pennsylvania.
And then you also have, then you start to get some of the more interesting candidates, like Trump's former ambassador who's dumping millions of our own money in. You have Kathy Barnett, who is full MAGA, QAnon at times, I believe. And so the Republican side's a whole bunch of fun. On the Democratic side, you have I mean, you have John Fetterman, who I'm sure viewers, people in Pittsburgh know well. I don't think I have to say much more about him. And then you have Connor Lamb out west as well, and then you have Malcolm Kenyatta, you have Val Arkush, it's just a really big field. I mean, the Senate. I'm mostly covering the governor's race, and I have to say I'm happy because it's nice to just have one like crazy primary packed of 13 people on the Senate. It's just, I mean, there's so many people. There's gonna be so much money spent on this race, and it makes sense. Like, I'm not trying to be dismissive. This is an important race. What happens in November is that the winner of this race could very well decide who controls the U.S. Senate. That's we're kind of dealing with what happens when you're at 50-50, and right now is with the constant drama about Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema. What do they think? I'm tired of seeing the headlines myself, and I'm a political reporter. This is the race that could decide if we get another 2 years of those headlines. Mercifully, I would love it if we don't. Just no more 50-50, please. And so the Senate race is just wide open, and I have no predictions to make, but there's a lot of candidates. And Pittsburgh, though, I mean, in the Democratic primary, you guys are in the driver's seat. You got 2 native sons in the race, no native daughters, worth noting, but you have Fetterman and Lamb, and I think that I know there's a lot of strong opinions out there on them both.
Right. And one thing I do want to mention as we go back to Khadija and JJ. Connor Lamb did get a big endorsement from the Philadelphia building trades. I don't know if anyone on the panel has any thoughts, about does that? There's obviously every statewide race. There's always, what is Philadelphia going to do? What is Philadelphia going to do? And obviously Malcolm Kenyatta, is a strong candidate from Philadelphia, but there has been this banter the entire time that Philadelphia is kind of, or the establishment in Philadelphia, those we all know that Ryan Boyer is a big time power broker in the city of Philadelphia. To see that picture of Ryan Boyer and Connor Lamb standing together, to me, I got to feel like that sends some sort of signal that there's some machinations going on in the city of Philadelphia. And will that, obviously we're not saying that's going to decide the election, we're not going to get into hyperbole, but I would love to get the panel's thoughts of what does that mean, or is that just one endorsement out of many endorsements that are going to come between now and whenever the primary is held, if hopefully these maps get figured out.
I can just say quickly, I mean, I think one of the big things that this means is it's a source of money. I mean, these are going to be really expensive races. And so if you get endorsements and supporters with a long history of supporting political campaigns, that's going to be a big deal. So far in the race, Lamb has had a little bit of a disadvantage on the Democratic side in fundraising. John Fetterman has done incredibly well. He started his campaign very early, first of all, but he's done incredibly well with small dollar donors. He has, not just in Pennsylvania, he's blown other candidates out of the water in Pennsylvania on the Senate race, but also just in the country. I think he's I haven't checked in a while, but I checked once, a couple months ago, and he was the non-incumbent who had raised the most money in the entire country. So, it goes to show you that's a sense of the scale there. And then I do want to say on the Republican side, there's just a lot of wealth in that field right now. We mentioned Dr. Mehmet Oz, who is a longtime reality TV show host. I guess that's what you would call his whole thing. A TV doctor. He has a lot of money and he's going to be a big self-funder. Steve mentioned David McCormick. He's not just a Wall Street guy. He used to be the CEO of the largest hedge fund in the world, Bridgewater. He just stepped down the other week. That guy has, more money than God. So he can put a lot of it in. Carla Sands is going to be a big self-funder. She's the sort of Trump-aligned businessman. She's going to have a lot of money. So basically on the Democratic side, that is going to be something to watch is, who's putting into these races, where it's going to come from. We often talk about how, it would be nice to keep money out of politics. We don't want, moneyed interests deciding the outcomes of these campaigns. It's too late for that in this race. It's going to be a really, really expensive race.
There's rumblings that this could be the first $1 billion race.
I don't know. I mean, again, I started reporting in Pennsylvania in 2016, and I remember that year the Pat Toomey race was like insanely expensive, and we're already just, I think, well on track to surpass that. So,
I want to comment on this, and there's a lot of always talk about electability when we get to elections like this, and I just want to mention that we need to make sure that we have a ballot that speaks to the voters. We are in times where people are not feeling as though their needs are being met. And so when we have an electorate that feels that way, that is not helpful for voter turnout. So we need to make sure that this ballot that comes to us in November of 2022 is something that's going to excite voters to turn out in record numbers. I hope that that is something that happens. I hope that that is something that excites the electorate, that gets them to turn out, because, again, these numbers need to be as if it is a presidential election.
Yeah, Jay, did you mind? I would just say, like, I wrote about this, and I think for Democrats, it is a really big problem. They're kind of the self-described party of diversity. They're always trying to talk about these issues, and they want to champion them. But when you look at the statewide ballot right now, Josh Shapiro is the front runner. He's a white guy. The Democratic ticket for Senate is mostly white men leading. Val Arkush is in there. Malcolm Kenyatta is in there. But, a lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the national media is kind of reporting Fetterman Lamb. That's the framing. So, one of the races that will be interesting is lieutenant governor. And I hate to just throw it out there. Like, this is an important position. They chair the board of pardons. If anything were to happen to the governor, they take over. Josh Shapiro is chosen as running mate Austin Davis, who, some Pittsburghers might know. He's from McKeesport, I believe. I think we were talking about him earlier in the show, then Shapiro tapped Davis, but that doesn't make him the running mate. He has to win his own primary, and he's running against Brian Sims. He's the first openly gay legislator to be elected to the General Assembly, and he is, he's a stalwart progressive. He's also a white dude. They both have their own they both bring a different diversity. They both would be, Austin Davis would be the first Black lieutenant governor, first Black statewide he'd be a first. Brian would be too. They're both, I think, and so I'm expecting a lot of, I'm very interested to look at just sort of how the lieutenant governor plays out, because, that's going to say a lot about, what is the Democratic Party valuing? I think we're going to see a lot of those values play in the lieutenant governor race. And they could play in some of the other races, but as of right now, most of the narrative is around white men in the Senate and the gov race.
Well, I think one of the things I want to say is I think we should exist in the reality that because money in politics is so different than it was just a few years ago, that fundraising is really only one factor in these races anymore. Now you can have an outside group that comes in with a couple $1 million and could make up for it. You saw that in the Republican Senate primary already, where Jeff Bartos has kept competitive in some ways in terms of spending until the billionaires really got in there, because of outside support. And so the one thing I wanted to just note in that is, like, I think one of the candidates that we don't talk about enough is Commissioner Arkush in the Senate race. Pennsylvania is a majority. Pennsylvania's electorate is a majority of women, but the Democratic primary electorate is even more of an even stronger female majority. The most votes in that race are going to come from the Southeast, both the Collier counties and Philadelphia. So I think both Chairwoman Arkush and Representative Kenyatta have to be part of this conversation, because in a four-way race, you may only need 35% to win. We've seen dynamics in these races change significantly because of one news story in other states. And so I think we have to keep that open. Commissioner Arkush, she has the backing of Emily's List, which has proven itself capable of winning these races, especially when there is only one female candidate, which there is. I also want to note that there's regional and then also issue-based differences that I think we're going to really have to pay attention to. You do have two candidates from the Southwest that is not as vote-rich as the Southeast. Val Arkush has taken a very interesting position in that race about banning fracking, which actually creates a really strong contrast with both of those two candidates from the Southwest, and is a key issue in the Southeast where there are a lot of votes. And the last thing I just wanted to say for Malcolm Kenyatta, who I think is a very exciting person in politics, whether or not, however this race goes, he does have some of the best boots on the ground organizations in Philadelphia that are already backing him, both the teachers union there and the national NEA, Working Families Party. He was backed, I believe, also by another one of the social service unions in Philadelphia over the week or last week at the same time as Lamb got his endorsement. So I think what we're seeing is this race really start to come into clearer view. And I think if you have a 4-person race with the dynamic that we're in now, and you might only need a plurality of votes to win, it's going to be a really interesting race. And fundraising is really only going to tell us one part of that story. Let me know who's backing who's going to be running ads in support of those candidates, who's going to be activating their constituencies that we know turn out in Republican or in Democratic primaries, and who's going to have the backing of those boots on the ground, because a lot of these folks don't have statewide organizations already for themselves. They don't have volunteer bases necessarily, especially if they're running for the first time statewide. And so it's going to be really important how they build that infrastructure over the next few months. And I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of right ground still left to be laid out here in the race for all 4 of the candidates. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds.
Miracle.
Thank you so much for that. And, as we wrap, bringing it back to redistricting, we know that there is a lot of change going on. One of the candidates here in, Pittsburgh, Ashley Cummins, suspended already her campaign just because of the way the redistricting is going. Do you foresee redistricting limiting the amount of people who are going to be coming out and running for these statewide offices? Again, we have until February, I believe it was like 17th, for people to sign up and to run. Or do you see it as a lot more people seeing that these maps are going to be more representative of their districts, so they're going to take advantage of the opportunity to run because, you may not need fundraising for some of the some of the down ballot positions? Do you see that going forward? And is that something that we want when we're talking about defending democracy? Do we want more people running for office?
I can just say, just as far as, the current mapping process goes, I mean, we just don't know what the maps are going to look like. So I don't know if I'm familiar with the particular candidate about in Pittsburgh, but in the House maps and the Senate maps, in the congressional maps, all 3, they're just not finalized yet. So even the House and Senate maps, which are a little bit more concrete at this point, they could still be tweaked. So those boundaries could shift. And so, it doesn't necessarily mean more or less people are going to be able to run. I think it's just, sometimes a new line really messes up somebody's plan to run for office. Other times it can draw somebody into a district that's going to be really good for what they plan to do in that race, or what they had hoped maybe would be possible. I do know, just in the, the proposed House map, Republicans were much more unhappy about that because it drew a lot of incumbents into districts together where they would have to face each other. It didn't happen quite so much for Democrats. So that's just one factor we look at. But there's so many things that can impact who is able to run in which districts, whether it works out for somebody in a given year after the maps get redrawn. The last thing I'll say is just with the petitioning deadlines, this is especially important for candidates. I mean, that could change. We are up against a really, really tight deadline right now. The legislature is cutting it super close. It's not totally their fault. They had really late census data come in. So it was just a hard timeline this year. But depending on, basically, I mean, it looks very likely the courts are going to end up drawing at least the congressional map. And there could also be litigation on the House and Senate maps. So we don't know when the process is going to be totally wrapped up. And that could change not just when the petitions are starting to go out and when they're being accepted, because that is a very likely thing that might happen, reducing the petition window before the primary. The primary could change. I mean, a lot of lawmakers have said that that's probably not going to happen. I wouldn't bank on it, but it's always possible if something happens with the maps. So there is so much up in the air right now.
Anyone interested in running for office should probably just keep checking back later.
One thing I did want to mention, I think is important, particularly about the proposed House map, is that because of the approach that was taken in drawing it, particularly when it comes to urban areas, the commission actually pursued trying to maximize representation and sort of the proportionality of these areas. So when you look at a place like Harrisburg, also Lancaster and Allentown, it actually creates new seats that are wide open in those areas, which is not something that we've ever really seen coming out of a redistricting process. And a big part of that is the commitment that was made, I think, by Chairman Nordenberg and those that engage on the House map, not to consider incumbents as strongly as has been done in the past. And it's also a testament to the leadership, I think, of having Democratic leader Joanna McClinton on the commission, who is the first person of color ever to be on that commission. And so I think that perspective, along with Chairman Nordenberg's desire to have maps that more accurately represent the political proportionality and also maximize representation for areas that are growing, which are our urban and suburban communities in particular, you see now that there are open seats that have majority or plurality of voters of color making up them, that actually create opportunities for new candidates of color to run without incumbent opposition, which is a really, really important thing for representation, but also like the way that redistricting should work on a lot of different levels. So I think that's a really exciting part about the proposed House map, and hopefully that the commission can finish its work and maintain that in the final map.
Now, I think that is a very important point. We'll jump to Khadija that you do make, is you see that what you talk about in the city of Pittsburgh. And JJ, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like Leader McClinton, strategy was to have less districts that were 65, 75%, 80% people of color, and then so instead of having 2 districts that were 75% people of color, create 4 districts that are like 40 to 50% people of color. And you can see that, in the city of Pittsburgh, where the 19th and the 24th legislative district, somewhat have been combined with the 34th legislative district, which is represented by Summer Lee. And now you have 3 districts that hover somewhere between 40 and 45% African-American population, as opposed to historically the 19th and the 24th legislative district that were both historically well over 50%, in population. It seems like that was one of does that jibe with, what you've been following as well? And also, Khadija, you can jump on that because I know you've been following it as well.
Yeah, I think it's important that we not pack communities of color into 1 or 2 safe districts. I think that Representative Summer Lee and others have proven that, Black folks and other folks of color can win legislative districts that are not completely Black districts. Obviously, Ashley Coleman's and Summer Lee are friends. And so, it was an honorable thing there, I guess, of Ashley to ensure that Summer has the opportunity to retain that seat if run for Congress is not successful. I think that it's really important to give more opportunities. And so when you do have a chance for there to be 4 folks of color to represent a community versus 2, that's always important, so that we can have better representation, so that we can actually choose our legislators and they not choose us, and we not be packed into districts. I also think about, the race here in central Pennsylvania as well. I think of Colleen Wynn, who dropped out recently because that's Patty Kim's district. And so there's a lot of honoring of that for the incumbents. I also think about Philadelphia, and, we're going to have Representative Rabb as one of the few who's going to have a primary challenge from the Democratic side with Representative DeLisio. And so I think these are just all important opportunities for us to increase our opportunities to have more people of color elected to the General Assembly. And particularly, as JJ mentioned, in the Lehigh Valley, huge opportunities, Latinx folks representing, so much of an increase in not only the electorate, but population, but to have so few represented in our General Assembly is an opportunity for Pennsylvania. And so really excited about that opportunity.
Thank you for that. Miracle, do you have a follow-up?
Our last question, to thank you all for sticking it out with us. We know this is going to be a very big election year. Is there any race of all the races that are happening that is somehow like your favorite outside of the beats you're doing? Is there like a politician that you think people are really going to like gravitate to that you may not have heard about? Or is there a position on the ballot that you want to make sure people are paying attention to, whether it's a commissioner or a committee seat? Is there something out there? And that'll be the last question. We'll go JJ, Khadija, Stephen, and Katie.
Well, as a former gubernatorial staffer, I am obsessed with the governor's election and definitely as number one. I do want to say, I think for me, the most exciting thing about 2022 is actually reflecting on 2021 and seeing the sort of historic nature of the candidates who won election in 2021, from Ed Gainey in Pittsburgh and the judicial candidates that of color that One Hood really played a huge role in. One Hood Power played a huge role in getting onto the ballot, but across Pennsylvania, from school boards to mayors to city councils, we saw an incredible amount of young people, women, and LGBTQ candidates, and especially people of color be elected. And I think we're going to see in 2022 that reflected in likely the most diverse slate that has ever run statewide to represent Pennsylvania in the legislature. And I'm really excited about the potential for us to bring new blood to Harrisburg, particularly in the legislature where we really desperately need it. So I think I would say, the governor's race is the most consequential, but the legislative races are where we're going to see the next generation of candidates put their stamp on the ballot, and that we need to do everything we can to try to bring that new energy to the legislature in 2022.
I'm really excited about the opportunity to see some change in the General Assembly overall. So much legislation has moved and luckily been stopped by the veto pen, but then moved along to constitutional amendments. So there's that. But I think that the race that I think is most exciting to me, that I'm really interested to see what the outcome is going to be, is the lieutenant governor race. As Kahari mentioned, there's been so few Black folks who have won a statewide election. I think the only other Black gentleman was our current Auditor General. So there has not been a lot. The opportunity there is immense. And then, Brian Sims being the first member of the LGBT community possibly to win the lieutenant governors. And then I think that a very interesting a recent jump into the GOP side was Brandon Flood, the previous Secretary of Pardons. So I think that entire lieutenant governor race is going to be very exciting to watch and to see how that finally ends. So that's where I am on that one.
And a quick plug before we go to Stephen, that also Chris Fry, the African-American mayor of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, who's also a Republican, is also announced as a candidate for lieutenant governor. So it looks like lieutenant governor field is trying to catch up to the gubernatorial field and the Senate field. I guess they're saying, hold my beer. So, we got to pay attention to what goes on there. So, Stephen?
I'll go with the governor's race just because that's a statewide race that I picked to cover. I don't think it can be understated how important the governor is. They have to produce a budget every year that's going to start negotiations for what are they going to spend on? How much is our schools going to get? How much are prisons going to get? How much are human services going to get? How much is the state police going to get? Transportation going to get? They drive that conversation. They have a chance to sign or veto bills. If you want more beer in gas stations, if you want to restrict access to abortion, if you want more abortion, if you want more guns, less guns, all that stuff has to go for the governor. And then, all of the agencies they run, I thought JJ brought up a good example of what a governor can do when they're just sort of creative, making voter registration available online. That wasn't a law. That was just Governor Wolf's administration saying, doesn't say we can't, let's make this. And I'm sure thousands of people have voted or have registered to vote for that. And so, you have to think the converse too for Republicans. Like, there's a lot of things that they might be able to do with the executive powers that are there. So, like, think about it. Like, I like to think about the governor's race, like, outside of just the horse race of it, but like, there is just a lot of power that smart people are going to be looking at this office and trying to think of how to use it on your pet issue to either harm you or help you. And I don't think that can be understated. And that's kind of what I'm hoping, the energy I'm hoping to take to how I cover the governor's race. And how are they going to use this immense power that the voters are trying to put in their hands?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I think all of these races are interested. I'm covering all of them. I would just pick as like one that intrigues me the most, the legislative races as a whole, and specifically the state house races. We're going to have a new map. I can't stress enough how complete GOP control of the legislature has been for the last decade, technically, but also, like, honestly, for most of the last 50 years. It's just been a very, very consistently Republican leaning chamber, save several periods. And so I'm not saying Democrats would win either the House or the Senate under these newly proposed maps. The maps aren't even finalized, but there is real potential of a sea change, and the maps are going to be in effect for 10 years. And so I think seeing what those do to this body, which is, again, it just, they have so much power over what happens in Pennsylvania, as all of you know. And having covered a split government for the last several years, I can tell you that there's a lot that doesn't happen when that's the case. And so, different dynamics are always really interesting. So again, who knows what is going to happen either this year or any other year with these new maps, what the maps are even going to do, but I will be watching that very closely.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Katie Meyer from WHYY, Stephen Caruso from the PA Capital Star, Kadita Kenner from the New Pennsylvania Project, and JJ Abbott from Commonwealth Communications. Thank you so much for joining us and adding on to a very, very enlightening discussion. Looking forward to talking to you very soon. So expect an email from us in the coming weeks as things start to pick up. But thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy another week of football for all the Eagles fans, Steelers fans, at least one more week. Both got the 7th seed. Who knows? Funny things happen in the NFL playoffs. So should be a fun week of football for the state of Pennsylvania.
I was going to say, Kari, any given Sunday, but it could be any given Saturday as well. You just never know.
Absolutely. And Monday now. They got the Monday night wild card game as well. It's like, can't get, Americans can't get enough football, Always a good time. So thank you so much again for joining us. Looking forward to talk to you soon. And thank you for your excellent work, either, as reporters as well as activists. So yeah, Miracle, that was a great discussion. Any final thoughts?
It's a lot happening with the elections. So again, if you are going to be 18 by election day, make sure you are registered to vote. If you are new to the area, if you are a returning individual and you're not serving a term of probation for violating election law, you can actually register to vote. The last day to register is going to be May 2nd. The last day to request a mail-in ballot is going to be May 10th. And again, the primary election this year is going to be May 17th. Now, if you are in the 20, I believe and this is something that, again, is maybe a little confusing for the people who are in the current 24th and 19th district. The special election is going to be on Tuesday, April 5th, to replace Gainey and Jake Wheatley. For Wheatley's seat, it is Arian Abney, and my mind is blanking of the other candidates, Reverend Grayson, who's going to be taking over for the 19th, and it would be a couple of people are still going to be announcing their campaign to run for Gainey's seat. So we're going to still be seeing some things on top of that we still have our congressional races. So we're going to have, election back to back. So just be mindful. A lot of stuff is coming up when it comes to elections. In addition, for those of you in Pennsylvania, I remember January 15th is the last day to, enroll in your healthcare coverage. A lot is happening. A lot is going on. And so if you've changed jobs or you're working in the gig economy or you're now purchasing your own healthcare, you have until January 15th. And again, with the Affordable Care Act, some of the affordable care coverage is gone through penny.com. We have that link for you in the chat as well. So elections are not ending in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of stuff for people, to do. But we're talking a lot about, the historic election. So tomorrow, on One Hood Media's Facebook and YouTube pages, we're going to be talking, with Mayor Ed Gainey. So one of his first live interviews, just talking about where he sees the city of Pittsburgh, what's it been like, after his first week on the job. So make sure you tune in tomorrow at 2 p.m. on the One Hood Media Network to hear that interview as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Miracle. Yes, and as we said, and we dropped in the chat as well, April 5th will be the special election in the city of Pittsburgh to fulfill the terms of former Representative, now Mayor Ed Gainey, and former Representative, now Mayoral Chief of Staff, Jake Wheatley. These elections will be held in what will soon be known as the old 19th district and the old 24th district. The lines for the special election will not correspond with the new maps that are coming out. And as Miracle said, some of the names that have been mentioned for the 19th legislative district have been Ariane Abney and Reverend Glenn Grayson. In the 24th legislative district, as you said, Ashley Comans, who had announced last summer, has announced that she will not run due to Wilkinsburg. Will be in the new 34th district, which is represented by Summer Lee, her a close ally. But I have heard that Martell Covington is planning an announcement very soon. And I've also heard to expect that Randall Taylor, as well as Will Anderson, may also run in that 24th legislative district in the special. And I would assume for the full seat. So those running in the 19th and the 24th legislative district will vote twice, more than likely in the 6th or 7th week period. They will vote on Tuesday, April 5th. And as long as the maps come out in time and the kind of whole logistical train of events happens on time, the May primary will happen on May 17th. So that's something to know if you live in the 19th legislative district and the 24th legislative district. There will be two elections, one in April and one in May. So that's going to be highly confusing for folks, but we will make sure that we continue to keep everyone informed about what's going on, particularly in those two districts, and how those districts will be changing. And the fact that there will be someone who will run to represent those districts for April through November. And then there will be the election held in May, which will be to decide who will be the nominee to serve the full 2-year term beginning in 2023. So it's going to be a lot to cover. We'll make sure that we will stay on it and have as many of the candidates come on this platform that you can make your own decisions as well as do your own research. But again, I want to thank Katie Meyer, Stephen Caruso, Kadita Kenner, and JJ Abbott for just bringing just a ton of insight and all the great work that they do.
And just because of one in the comments, if you are a college student or somebody who is living or traveling, you can vote by mail. Unless you change your residency to the place you are studying in, then you vote in that district. But if you are a college student, someone who is deployed overseas, someone who is working, out of town, you would just request a mail-in ballot to vote, and you would still be voting in the district that you are currently a resident of. And that is, for anyone who's traveling or not going to be in town on the actual day of the election.
And I know and a couple of things that came in the comment. Again, we'll run down the candidates running for lieutenant governor. I know somebody wanted to know who was running for lieutenant governor again. On the Democratic side, as we know of today, Austin Davis, state representative from McKeesport, who is running along with the Democratic frontrunner for governor, Josh Shapiro. You also have Brian Sims, state representative from the Philadelphia area. And on the Republican side, from what I understand now, there may be other candidates, but at least we know for sure 2 African-American candidates, Brandon Flood, the former pardons secretary who recently resigned, as well as Chris Fry, who was the mayor of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, in Lawrence County, which is also my father's hometown, in Western Pennsylvania, about 50 miles north of Pittsburgh. Again, Chris Fry, Brandon Flood, Brian Sims, and Austin Davis are currently the 4 known candidates for lieutenant governors. Anybody who forgot, let us know. We will definitely make sure that we spread the word about who else is running for lieutenant governor. And as for folks to know, even though Austin Davis and Josh Shapiro are running as a ticket, so to speak, this is not like a federal election. Josh Shapiro can't choose Austin Davis. Austin Davis still will have to win the primary, and whichever Democrat makes it through the primary will be running on the ticket with Josh Shapiro or whoever else may jump in the race and may potentially win the Democratic nomination for governor. So with that, want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. And again, our guests, Katie, Stephen, Kadita, and JJ, for joining us. We're looking forward to a really great conversation next week where we're going to talk about redistricting. We're still pulling our panel together, but we do have one confirmation I can speak of. My good friend Pat Clark from Keystone Progress is going to be joining us to talk about redistricting, and we're going to be reaching out to some more experts, and we're going to really take a deep dive into everything that's going on into redistricting next week. So to take us away with any parting shots, Miracle, it's all yours.
Yes, like we said, it's a lot happening, and we want to leave you with a couple of actions. Again, we're going to ask that you spend this week reaching out to your elected officials to talk to them about passing, the federal legislation. We had the Vigil for Democracy last Thursday, and we talked about this. So we also just want to make sure that you are contacting your senators, your Congress people, and telling them to pass, the voting rights legislation, the Pro-Democracy Act, and we'll put that link for you in the chat because it's very important. This next week we can have, especially we come up on honoring MLK Day, that we have legislation that protects the right to vote and allows people to have confidence and integrity when they go to cast their ballot, and know that their ballots will not be questioned and the veracity of their ballots will not be questioned because these legal supports are in place. So just make sure you do that. And with that, we bid you a good night. Thank you so much for tuning into the 100 Power Hour. Enjoy the rest of your week.